Welcome. My name is Caitlin Bassat, and I'm the Kamloops Youth Facilitator with the Invasive Species Council of BC. Thanks to everyone for joining us tonight for part one of the Plants Under Pressure workshop. This workshop is being presented by ISCBC Youth Facilitator Torin Kelly. Hi, Torin. How's it going?
Always forget to unmute myself, Caitlin. I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here. So during tonight's workshop, participants will learn how to create your own plant press. So by preserving plants, we can all help conserve plant biodiversity and expand our plant identification knowledge, which is one of my favorite pastimes currently. So I hope you all had a chance to sign in early and get any technical glitches worked out. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, you can write a note in the chat box and ISCBC technical support will send you a private chat. If you have any questions throughout the workshop, just feel free to pop them into the Q&A by clicking on the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom window. The host will then will answer any non-speaker related questions in the chat. We will have time at the end of the presentation to ask questions for Torin. And if we do run out of time to answer all the questions, we'll send the answers out in an email. So to begin, we'd like to find out who is here and where you all work and where you're all from and what your areas of interest are. So if you haven't already, if you could please type in your name, workplace, where you're from, or area of interest in the chat box, and then we can review them while I'm introducing Torin. So at this point, I'm pleased to give a warm welcome and introduction to Torin Kelly, who is presenting this workshop. Torin started working for the Invasive Species Council of BC in 2018. He's passionate about teaching and helping people gain new skills and tools to make a difference in their community. Torin attended BCIT for forestry and natural areas management, and then specialized in invasive species. So at this point, Torin, I will pass the mic over to you, and I hope everyone enjoys the workshop.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Yes, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm very excited to be doing this presentation. To start off, I want to let you know that I'm in Maple Ridge, which is on the unceded territory of the Kwantlen, Katzie, and the Chemainus First Nations people. So I want to thank them for allowing this to happen today. And yeah, so I just want to get an idea of, for everyone that's come in here, thanks for letting us know where you're from and where you're watching this, from. I want to launch a quick poll here for you guys with just one pretty simple question, just to kind of read the room here. I'd love to see what you guys where you guys are coming from. So, how many people have pressed plants before? I'm going to be going into the whole background of where I come from, why I wanted to press plants, why I initially first started to press plants, and that was through school. We had a nice project that we had to do where we learned how to press plants and exactly why preserving plants are important. And a big thing is that the word preserve and the word conserve often get interchangeably used. They're used quite often. And the big difference between conserve and preserve is to preserve something like a plant clipping, we're stopping it in time. So we're freezing that piece of nature in time so we can look back and actually see, you can see we're streaming on Facebook now. So we can look back in time and see at that specific point in time what's happening with those plants. So that's why we want to preserve plants. It's almost like traveling back in time to see exactly at that date and time what plants were growing in what areas, what they look like, lots of different information we're going to go into. So 18 of you, yeah, so I'm just going to quickly end the poll here and I'm going to share the results with everybody. So how many people here have pressed plants before? I press plants all the time. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for joining. I hope you learned something today a couple of times and some people that are brand new to pressing plants. So the majority seem to have know somewhat about what we're doing today, which is great. And for those of you who are brand new, I hope you learn lots. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly share my screen here. Let's get this party started. All right. Share screen. All right, Caitlin, are we good? We see the PowerPoint?
Yep, we're all good. I can see it.
Awesome. Yeah, so Plants Under Pressure. I'll be honest, I didn't come up with this great name. Once I heard it, I loved it. All the credit goes to Caitlin. I believe it was you, right? Plants Under Pressure. Love that name.
It was actually Corbin, but
Corbin.
Corbin, just so everyone knows, Corbin's our other youth facilitator with the ISC as well.
It was the youth team's idea altogether, which was great. So let's get this started. So I just want to quickly go through some objectives that I really want to get through today in the limited time we have. So I'm hoping that you guys are going to learn how to make your own plant press. We're going to learn how to properly collect samples. And with that, we're going to learn some data, some information that we want to collect with those samples. We're going to learn how to actually use a plant press. And then we're going to learn how to display or mount some different ways to do that. So scouring through the internet, there's lots of different resources, and I found this super, super well-made infographic, and it was at proflowers.com. I got the link up there at the top. And basically, it's just showing you how simple it can be to create these different plant presses. And the two I want to highlight on this page are a wooden plant press and just a simple book press. So for those of you that are familiar with plant pressing, I'm sure you've seen, I'm sure you've pressed plants in books before. But for those of you who are not, it's super simple. It's going to be the most accessible way to press plants. But one of the most, I'd say, efficient ways to press plants is this wooden press. And all you really need are 2 pieces of wood that are the same size. And whether that's you just going and buying a piece of plywood and cutting them evenly, or just finding 2 pieces of scrap wood and cutting them to the same size, you're not looking for anything too fancy. You're going to need 4 bolts. The length depends. It says length dependent. And what it depends on is the amount of plants you want to put in your press. So the more plants you put in your press, the longer those bolts are going to need to be. So you can actually fit all of the plants in there. You're just going to need some wing nuts to tighten those down with your hands, some blot paper, some newspaper. And for those of you that don't know what blot paper is, it's just this thick kind of almost canvasy paper that when it absorbs moisture, it actually gets better at absorbing moisture. So it's pretty good to have in this because the objective is to get all the moisture out of that plant. And corrugated cardboard, and this is just cardboard that has those nice long holes in them, and I'll show you an example. We have a little video coming up. And the book press, so any book that you can have, you get your book, open it to the middle, get yourself a piece of paper. If you have blot paper, great, put it in there as well. And then you're gonna layer on top. We'll go into that in a little more detail, but a book one is very simple. And this one I found very interesting. I've never heard of this before, but I was suggested to mention this one, is using a flattening iron to press the plant. So once you flatten the plant out relatively by putting it between 2 pieces of paper and putting a book on top, you can actually use a dry flattening iron to take the moisture out of the plant. Makes sense. And I thought I'd just mention that one quickly. So here's a video. This video is of me in my backyard collecting a fern, but just explaining there are some things to think about when you're actually collecting plants. So when we're out in the field and we want to be collecting a sample for our plant press, we want to make sure first off, do we know if this plant is an endangered species or if it is a plant that's under concern, so whether or not there might not be that many plants found in the wild. A good example in BC is a trillium plant, a beautiful plant. If you want to, I'll put a little picture of it on the screen here. Trillium, when you go out, we would not want to be clipping trillium plants because they're very sensitive. So what we want to do, first off, we want to remember how big our plant press is because we don't want to be taking too much of the plant if we don't necessarily need to be taking it. So we're going to come out. I want to say my plant press is, I think it's 11 by 17. I'm going to take the plant here. Now the fern, we could cut the fern from the bottom of the plant and it wouldn't damage it too much. It wouldn't damage it at all, but basically once I have clipped the plant off, make sure I do a nice clean clip. So I'll bring myself a pair of clippers with me. If you don't have a knife, be very careful when you're cutting it with a knife to not actually injure yourself. So we're going to take this plant, and the best place that you can store this plant is in a plastic bag, and that's so the moisture of the plant doesn't escape too fast because we want there to be moisture in this plant when we're pressing it, so it stays relatively green. It stays basically the way that we would want to see it in nature, and that allow us to press this plant so it actually looks very similar, and we can use it as a good ID tool. Awesome. I hope that was clear for you guys. There's going to be 2 more videos too, so hopefully those stay clear. In that video I mentioned, I think I misspoke and said if you don't have a knife, make sure not to cut yourself. What I was basically saying is clippers are relatively inexpensive. If you have them at home, great. They're the perfect tool for doing stuff like this when we're taking samples. They're super safe. And if you don't, and you do have a knife, make sure that you are being safe when you're collecting those samples. One thing I didn't mention in the video, which I wanted to quickly mention, is that when we are collecting samples for pressing, a big thing that we want to do is we want to hopefully be able to get as many identifiers of the plant as we can at a time. So something that might have berries or something that might have flowers, we want to try to get the plant when it's flowering or when there's berries. So when we look back at our plant samples, we can use it as even a better ID tool. So the fun bits, all the bits that I love to do: data collection, data collection, data collection. So when you're starting off, you don't necessarily need to get too much into detail. You don't need to go into biogeoclimatic zones and subzones and microclimates and all these big things. It's good to just start off if you do know what the plant is, a common name, a scientific name if you can, if you collected it, the date you collected it, and generally just the location that you collected it. The reason that we want to collect this kind of data is so not only can we use it as an identification tool, just generally broadly in a large area, we can look back at this specific plant pressing, at this plant sample, and let's say in 10, 15 years from now, we notice there is no more plants that people are like, wait, weren't there these plants before? You can look back in your herbarium or your plant collection. You can say, yes, there were these plants here at this location at this date. And it's a way that we can, like I said before, we can actually look back into the past. We can kind of travel back in time to see what habitat was like, which is super interesting to me. And I hope to never not see a plant, but I love the idea of being able to look back and see how these plants are kind of moving around and evolving. So like I said before, get as detailed or as simplistic as you want. The more detail, the better. Great. Even this one that I have as detailed on my slide here isn't necessarily super detailed. I don't talk about biogeoclimatic zones, but I talk about the location, and not just like Burnaby Lake. I talk about it was on a stream bank and it was in a riparian area. And for all the other stuff, I have other notes. So I noticed that this particular plant, which was a hardhack, was the very first hardhack to bloom in that section of the trail. So using a plant press, I quickly talked about, and I'm going to be sending out some great resources after this for when you guys are going to come back next week and show off some of your awesome plant pressing. I'm going to send some resources out for you guys to actually build your own plant presses. But just quickly talking about the wooden plant press, the book plant press, and that new flat iron plant pressing. Just to start with the wooden plant press. So you're going to want to drill 4 holes, as you can see in the diagram there. And the reason that we're doing it this way is so we can distribute the pressure of the plants, distribute the pressure of the press across the plants evenly. The same with the book here. What you're going to want to do is when you take the book, open the book to the middle, so you have the most amount of pages on the left and the right hand side of the book. You're going to get your sample, you're going to put it in a piece of newspaper, fold it over, and you're going to put it into that book. Close the book, and then we're going to put weight on it. And the thing that's getting the moisture out of these plants is the weight. And the reason we want the moisture out of the plants is because the moisture is what allows the plant to start to degrade, starts to biodegrade in there. So if we get the moisture out relatively fast, then that's how we preserve that sample. There's nothing to start breaking down that material. For this flat iron press, that I've never used this method before, but it seems relatively easy as well. You want to do something similar to when you're pressing a book, except you're only going to get 2 pieces of paper and put that plant sample between those, weigh it down with the book, wait till that's flat, And then you're going to take a completely empty iron, no water in it at all, because the last thing we want to do is put water into it, put water back into the plant. You're going to slowly, it says 15 seconds on, 15 seconds off. And then you're going to pull up the paper and see, okay, is most of the moisture out? No. 15 more seconds on, 15 more seconds off until the plant looks completely devoid of water. And the way that we would know that is if we pick the sample up, it would stay nice and straight. It wouldn't kind of flop around. So I've made a video of me using my plant press, and I want to just share this quickly with you guys. So to start off, once we have our plant press, we're going to untighten these straps, and we're going to put our plant sample, which we have, as we know, is a fern. We're going to take this off, put it to the side. One piece of cardboard. This is called blot paper. Basically, it's just used to absorb excess moisture from the plant. This is just a thin piece of paper. Most people will use newspaper. This setup is from a professional plant press that we use. So this is our plant, freshly cut. I just took it out. And if we look here, we can see front and back of the plant. Now, the way that these plants are displayed, a lot of the time, it's good if we can actually take one of these fronds here, and if we could turn it around, and it's okay if it snaps off, it's not that big of a deal since the plant's gonna be pressed anyways. But we wanna press one of the fronds backwards, and that's so we can actually see when the plant is mounted on display, we can see what the back of the fronds look like. So just like we took off from the bottom, it goes piece of cardboard, so a thick piece of cardboard that's corrugated, a piece of blotter paper, and then a thin piece of paper here. And the reason we have all those different layers are the cardboard is made to spread out the pressure from the two straps we have. The blotter paper is made to absorb the majority of the water, and the paper here is to absorb the paper is here to use to absorb the majority of the water. The blotter paper is to absorb any excess, and then if it gets to the cardboard, if there's that much water, the cardboard can also absorb some of that water. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to put back on this piece of paper, making sure that leaf that we flipped upside down is still upside down. Put the paper on there, piece of blotter paper, make sure everything's nice and even. We can get our cardboard, and depending on how large your press is, you might have 1, 2, 3, maybe even 10 samples in your press at once. So it's a good idea to take your straps and evenly distribute them across your press. We're going to tighten them a little bit on each side just so we can get an even spacing on them. Once we get a little more tight, we're going to make sure tight as we can get it. When your plant is initially pressed, what will happen is that it'll only get pressed, you can only tighten it so tight. When you come back in about 2 days time, you'll notice there'll be a little bit less pressure on it, and that's because a lot of the moisture has come out. So you're just going to want to come back every few days, give it a little tighten, and around 5 days, your plant will be perfectly pressed and ready to go to our next step, which is mounting for display. Awesome. Yeah. Another thing I wanted to mention about different types of plant presses, and this kind of brings it up for me, is I have a fair number of old belts I don't use. And another way that you can do it, you don't necessarily need to use bolts and wing nuts. You can just use 2 belts. It's all about getting pressure onto the plant. So whatever way you find pressure, whether it's a bunch of weights you lift, whether it's belts tightened around it, etc., it just has to get the pressure onto those plants to push the water out. So I made some movie magic, and I'm going to say that in this quote too, in this video too, but this is after those plants have been pressed. So after our 5 days of plant pressing, going back every other day to make sure that the straps on your press are nice and tight, to make sure we're getting out as much water those plants as we can, as quickly as we can. The quicker the water comes out of it, the more well preserved it will be, because the thing that allows these plants to start to break down and rot is the moisture inside of the plant. So let's start by taking our straps off that are nice and tight here. Here we go. Flip it over, flip it over. Now, I had the opportunity to go out and collect some plant samples. So there's a few here after that period of 5 days pressing. This will be the first time I'm looking at them, so here's hoping that these plants turned out quite well. I'm just gonna jump to probably the middle plant here. That'd be the plant that's most well pressed. Just to impress you guys, see how well we did. Okay, so blotter paper, the blotter paper here to absorb that moisture, as well as this piece of paper, the moment of truth. Ta-da! So, here is a pressed plant. Now, looks quite flat, I don't know if you can tell, very flat. This is a St. John's wort. Pretty cool, hey? So basically what we're going to be able to do with this pressed plant, this will be preserved. Most, if not all, the moisture is out of this plant now, so it won't start to break down when we go out and we mount this onto for display. So I'm going to put this to the side, constantly changing. So we're going to look at one more plant here, just so we know that the other one wasn't a fluke. Oh yeah, so this is one of my favorite plants to press, and that's because you usually get this nice purple color out of this plant. I don't know if you guys can tell what this is. This is a hardhack plant. Now hardhack, when it is not pressed, when it's still alive and standing upright, you get this really nice pink to purple. But when we do press it, it turns into this kind of lavender-esque purple here. This is a hardhack plant. I'm very excited. That turned out very well. And I did take a little too much off of the plant, so I wasn't able to press it in one go, but that is totally okay. I snipped it off and I put it right beside it since we have such a wide range here. Now, I don't know what my camera person was doing there. The frame was totally off. I set my tripod a little too high there, but the moment of truth, here's the plant here. So this is that hardhack plant that I pressed. And this is what that tag looks like for each of the plants. I'm not going to go through all the different plants we have, or all the different data I've collected. They're all collected from the same site, the same day, by the same person, and identified by the same person, me. But I just wanted to show you some of the woes that can happen when you're pressing plants, and hopefully none of this happens to you, but sometimes it might. So this hardhack plant was pressed very well. The flowers will still lose color over time, but the leaves are quite stiff. Most of the moisture is out of that plant, so I was super impressed with that. This one here, June plum. These leaves have a lot of moisture in them as well. The way that I put this down on the press, I wasn't too impressed with, but a lot of the leaves were folded over when I put it down. None of the leaves were completely flipped over, so I couldn't see the other side of the leaves. So that one I wasn't too happy with, but it's okay. It's still pressed, it's still looking good. This one, this is Himalayan blackberry. The leaf that I flipped over there looks great. The flowers, however, that were on this plant, the leaves are gone. I don't really expect the flowers a lot of the time to make it, especially when they have these really thick seed heads, flower heads. Oftentimes they'll just fall off. And I was hoping to get some berries with it to press right beside it, just so I know, but there was no berries there either. This is a plant that a tree that I've never pressed before, cedar, Western red cedar. And when I took it out after 5 days, it didn't seem to be pressed a whole lot. There seemed to still be a lot of flex in the plant, so a lot of moisture. So I have that back in there, and I'm going to keep putting it in there, keep tightening up, and hopefully that we're going to get it a little more preserved. This one turned out very well. This is the St. John's wort that you all saw in the video. The flowers were preserved very well. The leaves were great. You can see the different arrangement of the leaves. So that's a good ID tool there. This is one that I've never pressed before either. This is a Himalayan balsam, or also known as policeman's helmet. And for those of you who have pulled policeman's helmet or know policeman's helmet, you'll know that it is almost entirely made of water. There isn't a whole lot else to it. So when I press this down, it just disappeared. You can see you can see almost through it. The leaves are kind of coming apart. The flowers, you can see they're purple or actually pink. And that's something that I should be writing in my notes, which I didn't. So if you notice that you preserve something, you press something, and the flower's color might change or the leaf arrangement changed, whatever it is, it's good to note those things down. So when you look back at your tag, you can say, oh, okay, the flower's color is this when it isn't pressed. Just good to have that information. English holly, these leaves are very thick, very waxy, and I've had a very difficult time trying to press these. You can see it's already starting to get brown in the middle. So I'm going to make sure to put that back in there. Hopefully we're going to get that pressed a little more, because if not, it can actually just start to rot and start to mold. Hopefully that doesn't happen though. This one, English ivy, the leaves always press very well, the English ivy leaves, and they're perfect there. I'm super happy with that one. I always try to put the root in there. Very rarely does the root do anything but stay round and not pressed. So I think the next time I do it, I'll just keep that root out of there and put a lot more leaves in there just to have that nice and preserved. Now this is a quick video of me explaining some different ways that you can display the press, but I'm gonna hopefully get some time to ask you guys different ways that you have or that you might have ideas of how you would want to display your plants. So once we have our plants nice and pressed, we have to move on to the mounting part of this. Now, I made a little movie magic here. I have some plants that are previously pressed that I'll show you here. Now, these are the two ways that I found easiest to display pressed plants. Now, it is obviously smaller than our area that we pressed, as well as pretty small compared to the actual size of this plant here. But that might just mean that you have to cut the samples a little bit down to the point where they do fit on the page. Now, these two look quite similar, but they are different. One of these is put onto just a piece of paper with some glue, as well as the little tag that we're going to talk about down here. And this one here has been put onto photo paper, or a photo collage or photo book paper. So basically the advantage of this is that you can just peel this back, no glue required. I was able to put this pressed plant here, this rosy twisted stalk, on here, and if I ever needed to come out and actually take this plant up, I can, if it hasn't been on here for too long, I can take it up, it'll pop right up, and you can move it to a different thing. So it's pretty easy to store that way. This method's a lot easier for plants that are not too thick. They get quite thin, whereas this being a Alnus rubra, or a red alder tree, it didn't get quite as flat. The branches here, the little twigs, are quite woody and they don't lose as much moisture, so they stay nice and thick and a little brittle. So we're going to keep that there, but these are two different methods that you can use. There's lots of other methods. I've seen people use pressed plants as art. So a lot of people will mount them onto picture frames and put them up on their walls. There's lots of different ways. Just the method that you need to take is that you want to basically protect it from anything scratching it or scraping it or whatever it is. So you can be using this as a identification tool. So yeah, there are a number of other ways that I'm sure everyone else could think of that I couldn't think of to display these plants. One that I know is a friend presses plants and she actually uses them as stamps. So she'll take the press plant out, she'll paint on the press plant, and then she'll throw it onto a canvas. You can put them, you can laminate them, you can put them in picture frames, like I said, photo cling pages, and just glue to a piece of paper. But that is the time. I think I hit it right on the nose, Caitlin. 6:30 on the dot. A little too much time. I like talking a lot. So we still got time for questions though?
Yeah, we do. That was great, Torin. Thank you so much for that
of course.
Excellent presentation. I know myself, it's been quite a few years since I've actually pressed plants. It was back when I was in college, so I'm excited to get out there and try it again. So we do have a couple questions. First one is from Leo. He's wondering if you can use the Blot paper more than once, or is it just a one-use product?
Great question. Yeah. Funny enough, the more you use Blot paper, the more absorbent it gets. So you keep using it, and I wish I could get into the chemistry and the math and, you know, the science of it. But yes, you can use the blot paper consistently over and over again when you're pressing the plants. The one that you might need to replace over time is definitely that newspaper or the paper that you use in there. It might get a little bit, yeah.
Great. And where's the best spot to purchase blot paper? Like, can you just find it? Is it best online or?
Yeah, I know places like Michael's or craft stores will sell blot paper.
Awesome.
I bought this plant press in like a set from a place in BC. So they make and sell specifically plant presses. And if you do that route, they'll sell you the exact right size of blot paper and cardboard and etc. So, but
Great.
Michael's will sell them for cheap.
Perfect. And then Amanda is wondering if you can use watercolor paper in place of blot paper.
I don't know, Amanda, if it has a similar kind of function of absorbing moisture from it. I don't see why not.
Amanda, try it out, and then if you come to part 2 next week, you can let us know how it went. That'd be great. Also, I have a question. When you're pressing the plants, like I saw the one, it was hard to get the leaves flat. Have you ever tried using anything to stick them down? Like, I know double-sided tape would be too sticky because you'd have to, that's not where you're mounting your paper, is on the blot paper. So any methods that you've tried or any ideas?
The method that I've found best, and it might not necessarily be the best method, but the method that's been easiest and most effective for me, honestly, is just to do your best to gently break the leaf off, maybe not even off, but like break it backwards. Or like I tried to do there, you just twist it and then try to press your hand down on it for a second and flatten it out. That way it will. Another way that I know people actually display their plants is they'll put it into like a clear sheet on both sides and they'll laminate it. So you don't have to do that. You can just flip it over and see what the other side of that whole thing looks like.
Great. And then we've got a question from Lindsay, wondering if newsprint ever transfers onto the pressed plants, or is it best to use blank paper?
I've used newspaper a fair bit with my other presses, and I've never had that issue of ink transfer on it at all.
Great.
Yeah.
And then Bruce is wondering, do aquatic plants have too much water to press?
Unless you're pulling it right out of the lake and throwing it in there, I think you're okay. You might get the same result that I got with the Himalayan balsam, where it might not necessarily press the best, but just because it doesn't press the best doesn't mean that it isn't still a good still a good sample, right? It might not be perfect, but it's still better to have that press. I know I've seen people that have pressed like water milfoil, and it turns out quite nice, and it's pretty easy to define it that way.
Yeah, when I was back in college, we had to do a plant press in our botany class, and we didn't have access to blotting paper. We just used lots and lots of newspaper and paper towel, and it worked fine for what I was using it for. So
absolutely,
I had some good success for it.
Yeah, blotting paper is best case scenario. Yeah, if you can get it.
For sure. Another question from Rob is, do you add GPS coordinates for your location info?
Absolutely. If you can do that, that's the best. That's your best case scenario. I did not, but when you're getting, and I'm going to send out some resources after this, hopefully. The Royal BC Museum has some really, really great instructions on data collection. And they go, and it's their job to go across BC and collect very, very intricate data, and they'll GPS coordinates is as precise as you can get it. So if you can do that, that's great.
Awesome. And then Anna is wondering if you have any tips for preserving the color of the plant as they fade with time.
Yeah, I honestly am at a loss for that one. I've noticed that if I'm able to press a plant as quickly as possible, as soon as possible, sometimes the color will come out. I'm just going to quickly show you guys. I'm going to turn my little virtual background off here, and I'm going to show you this plant that I've pressed. This one here. So this is fireweed. And I don't know if you guys know, fireweed's quite pink. But when it presses, it loses some of that color. But I pressed this plant about two and a half years ago, and it still has that color. So it all depends on how fast you get the moisture out of the plant, and how fast from cutting it to getting it back to your press.
And also too, if you're creating it and you're hanging it as art, just, I would say keep it away from a sunny location, because I know sun does a number on art pieces if they're prone to fading. Another question from Lindsay is it possible to press flowers for too long?
I couldn't give you a definite answer. I don't think there'll be too much harm, because as you are pressing the plants, you press it, moisture will come out, it'll be lighter. You press it again, the moisture will come out, it'll be lighter. You press it again. So I suppose at a certain point, you might be, there might be too much pressure on it because no more water can come out. But the only thing that I would see doing there is it might be hard to take it off of the plant press. That's from my experience though. I don't know of any, when I've pressed flowers, there's never been any problems of leaving it in there too long.
And I just saw a comment from Linda. She says she has pressed flowers from 25 years ago and they have faded, but there's still some color left. So thanks, Linda, for that input there. It's always great to hear people's experiences. Last question. Rob says, how about including the root along with above ground portions, maybe useful for some identifying features?
Yeah, so for stuff like St. John's wort or some of the more herby plants and shorter plants, it's great if you can get the whole plant instance. If you can get roots, stem, flowers, seeds, the whole shebang, that is excellent. So if you can get the roots in there, it's perfect. And that's why I kind of put the roots in there for the English ivy, but English ivy roots are they're very thick a lot of the time. So they're a little harder to press, but for the smaller plants, they are pretty thin and you can get the moisture out of those pretty good.
Great. Well, thanks, Torin. That's all the questions. And I just want to say a big thank you on behalf of the ISC and everyone listening for that really interesting presentation tonight. We hope everyone that's here tonight will be able to join us next week for part 2 of this workshop. If you haven't registered yet, you can visit our website at bcinvases.ca and sign up. We'll also be sending out a short link to an evaluation survey to all participants. So if you could please fill it out, that'd be great, as we definitely would love your feedback and ideas for future workshops. Also, if you're between the ages of 15 to 30, we'd like to invite you to join the Invasive Species Council of BC's Youth Volunteer Program. So currently, youth across BC are volunteering in their communities to take action against invasive species. And this workshop is part of the way that they can earn volunteer hours. So again, you can check our website out for more information. And thanks, everyone, and have a great night.
Thanks a lot, everybody.